more than anything right now, I am furious, I am livid, I am pissed over the reactions and the responses coming from Hollywood celebrities over the death of Charlie Kirk. And today we are going to be exposing these scumbags.
This has just happened. We just found out that Charlie Kirk got shot.
The death of Charlie Kirk, it's bringing out a lot of true colors from a lot of actors, actresses, writers, directors, and more. Musicians, authors. We all saw what happened with Stephen King, by the way. He's a terrible guy. We know one thing now about Tom Hanks and where he stands, and he's been very vocal about this.
Something happened that shook millions of people, not just because of the tragedy itself, but because of what it revealed about the way we talk, react, and even fight in today's culture. The sudden loss of Charlie Kirk didn't just spark sadness. It ignited one of the most heated online firestorms we've seen in a long time. Within hours, Hollywood stars, public figures, and everyday people were posting their takes. Some were respectful, some were shocking, and others seemed to twist the moment into fuel for their own agendas. And that's exactly what made this story so explosive, because the reactions said just as much about our culture as the event itself.
Stephen Colbert, who decided to give his thoughts about it, and already, I'm getting mad right now just thinking about it. But listen to what Stephen Colbert had to say. And this is a very tame one compared to some of the ones that we're going to be checking out after this.
We here at The Late Show learned that Charlie Kirk, a prominent right-wing activist, was killed at a speaking engagement in Utah. Our condolences go out to his family and all of his loved ones. And I hope it is obvious to everyone in America that political violence does not solve any of our political differences.
You can just F right off all the way to the other end of the earth with that, Stephen Colbert.
Political violence doesn't solve anything, and I hope that we all understand that.
There is only one side that is committing this type of violence. It is not just, both sides doing this all the time, back and forth with each other. Instead of saying political violence, how about you say leftist violence? He wants to continue to try to shift as much of the blame.
So let's break it down piece by piece and uncover what really happened in the hours after the news broke and why it has people arguing like never before. The announcement hit like a thunderclap. News outlets reported that Charlie Kirk, a major conservative voice and activist, had died following a speaking engagement. For many, it was surreal. Kirk had been one of the most visible figures in the political landscape, constantly on college campuses, television, and social media. To supporters, he represented a fearless willingness to say what others wouldn't.
Charlie Kirk,
shut the F up, Stephen Colbert. You caused this, go F yourself, completely correct. It is because of the dangerous rhetoric of people like you, Stephen Colbert, that has led to this moment, and the mainstream media in general. Calling conservatives Yahtzees and all sorts of absolutely horrific things over the years, vilifying conservatives, painting us as monsters, trying to dehumanize us. That is what has led to this moment. And he's not the only one. Oh man, we have George Takei here, okay? Or Takei, however you want to say his name. To be honest, I don't really care. And this was posted yesterday, literally right as soon as we were finding out the information of what had happened to Charlie Kirk. This is what he decided to post. I hope Charlie Kirk recovers quickly, then, like James Brady, uses his megaphone to help advocate for common sense limits on firearm.
To critics, he was a lightning rod who seemed to thrive on controversy. But no matter where people stood, the news was stunning. And in moments like these, there's often a pause. A moment where people set differences aside and recognize the humanity of what just happened. That pause, though, didn't last long, because almost instantly, attention shifted away from the loss itself and toward the reactions that poured in from Hollywood, the media, and other public figures. It became clear that this wasn't just going to be another news story. This was about to turn into something much bigger, a spotlight on the culture war, lit up brighter than ever.
Absolutely just disgusting. We also have Stephen King, who decided to say a very similar thing. The motivation of the man who shot Charlie Kirk isn't clear, although he's probably mentally unstable, duh. What is clear is that it was another example of American gun violence. They cannot take the responsibility that this is the results of their own political party. They cannot take that type of responsibility. No. It always just gets blamed on the piece of equipment that would never even hurt anybody unless it was used in that way. Like, nobody ever says, your pencil misspelled this word, because that is completely stupid. It isn't the pencil, it is the person who is using the pencil. There's only one side that is doing this type of stuff, time and time again. But of course, they don't want to talk about that, do they? Now, it isn't all bad. Thankfully, we do have some individuals.
At first, some responses seemed respectful enough. A few statements offered condolences to his family, acknowledging the seriousness of what had taken place. But within minutes, the tone of the online conversation began to split down the middle. Some couldn't resist framing the news in political terms, using it as a springboard to push long-standing debates about guns, ideology, and the dangers of extremism. This is where frustration began to boil over. For many, it felt as if the human side of the story was being overshadowed by opportunism. Instead of simple sympathy, celebrities and commentators were weaving in their talking points, turning a death into a platform. And for Charlie's supporters, that was infuriating.
During 9/11, I added a somber prayer for Charlie Kirk's family. This is a very dark moment. Candace Cameron Beer, who said this: we love you, Charlie Kirk. Well done, good and faithful servant. Chris Pratt, praying for Charlie Kirk right now, for his wife and young children, for our country. We need God's grace. God help us. I'm definitely going to continue to cover this.
It wasn't just that critics disagreed with him in life. It was that they seemed to treat his death as a moment to score points. That shift from grief to politicization is what made the first wave of reactions so controversial. But what really shocked people was what came next. Comments that didn't just politicize the tragedy, but pushed the boundaries of taste, respect, and basic decency. As social media lit up, one thing became obvious. This wasn't going to be a story of unity. Almost immediately, lines were drawn. On one side, you had those who mourned Kirk and criticized Hollywood figures for their remarks, accusing them of exploiting the tragedy. On the other, you had voices who insisted that Kirk himself represented the kind of rhetoric that fueled division.
Is Tom Hanks, who was one of the worst takes yet and comes just after Stephen King received tons of backlash. Hanks delivered the following. Well, from where I'm standing, what happened on that day, it was a symptom of the toxic rhetoric coming from one side of the country, and I don't want to see people go blaming Democrats. We all know where this is coming from. It's coming from the lies and hyperbolic statements that come from MAGA Republicans that really do this over.
And that his passing was part of a much larger conversation about violence in America. This is where polarization took over. The debate wasn't just about what happened, it was about what it meant. And in a culture already deeply fractured, every reaction seemed to pour gasoline on the fire. Critics claimed the conservative movement was weaponizing the tragedy to silence opposition. Supporters accused the left of being cold, calculated, and heartless. Both sides accused the other of hypocrisy. What should have been a unifying moment instead turned into yet another battle in the to avoid pointing fingers while still implying blame. On Twitter, clips of the segment were shared thousands of times, with captions blasting Colbert for being fake and tone-deaf. But he wasn't the only one. George Takei, who has built his online brand around political commentary, posted a reaction that shocked even some of his own fans. He wrote that he hoped Kirk would recover quickly, and like James Brady, use his platform to advocate for stricter gun laws. Now, read that carefully. At first, it sounds like sympathy, but then comes the pivot. Within the same breath, Takei turned the tragedy into a policy argument. For many, the timing was everything. Hours after the announcement, while family and friends were still processing the news, Takei was already steering the conversation toward legislation. Supporters of Kirk slammed him for exploiting the situation, saying it was proof that for some celebrities, politics always comes first. And then came Stephen King, known for being outspoken on social issues. King speculated that the shooter was probably mentally unstable and called it another example of America's gun problem. Again, no real acknowledgement of Kirk as a person, no sympathy for the family, just another case study in the endless gun debate. Critics called King's response predictable and lazy, but for Kirk's audience, it felt worse than that. It felt cold, almost like the tragedy was just another data point in an argument he'd been making for years. What made all these statements so controversial wasn't just the words themselves, but the timing. When emotions are raw, the expectation is that people will show empathy first, opinions second. But in these cases, it seemed reversed. Opinions first, empathy either missing or tacked on as an afterthought. That's why these reactions went viral, sparking anger not only from Kirk's base, but from people in the middle who simply thought, isn't this too soon? Of course, defenders of Colbert, Takei, and King pushed back. They argued that these were public figures speaking out on issues they've always been vocal about, and that tragedies are exactly the moments when debates about guns and violence need to happen. But that defense didn't do much to quiet the outrage, because in the court of public opinion, perception is everything. And the perception here was clear. These weren't tributes, they were provocations. And that's exactly why the controversy kept building. People weren't just debating Charlie Kirk anymore. They were debating what it means to respond to tragedy in the first place. Should celebrities be expected to keep politics out of their statements? Or is that impossible in today's world? That question fueled the fire even further, keeping the story alive for days as arguments spread across Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. While the internet erupted with heated takes, a handful of celebrities chose a path of respect and empathy. Tim Allen, for example, shared a psalm, prayer for Charlie Kirk's family, reminding people that the loss coincided with another deeply painful anniversary, 9/11. His message carried a weight that cut through the noise. Actress Candace Cameron Bure also offered heartfelt words, calling Kirk a faithful servant and expressing love for him and his family. Chris Pratt added his own message, asking for God's grace and support, not just for Kirk's loved ones, but for the entire country. These kinds of reactions stood out because they felt rare. In a moment where so many were racing to inject politics into the conversation, these messages simply paused to acknowledge the humanity of what happened. And that's exactly why they resonated with Kirk's supporters. They weren't about agendas. They weren't about scoring points. They were about loss, compassion, and the reminder that behind the debates, these are real lives. And this contrast between outrage on one side and grace on the other revealed something deeper about where we are as a culture right now. Step back for a moment, and the bigger picture becomes clearer. This wasn't just about one man's death. It was about how quickly tragedy gets absorbed into the machine of modern discourse. The way we react, the speed of social media, and the hunger for instant takes mean that even in moments of loss, empathy is often drowned out by agendas. What should be a pause for reflection becomes just another round of the culture war. And that exposes something uncomfortable, that as a society, we've reached a point where even death isn't off limits from being politicized. But it also revealed something else. The stark difference between those who used the moment to push their ideologies and those who simply offered compassion shows us the choices people make under pressure. It reminds us that even in times of division, there are still individuals willing to step back, show humanity, and remind others what really matters. And maybe that's the deeper lesson here. While conflict dominates the headlines, empathy still has power. But the question is, are we listening? In the end, the story of Charlie Kirk's death will be remembered not only for the tragedy itself, but for the firestorm of reactions that followed, From sharp condemnations to heartfelt prayers, the responses exposed the deep fault lines running through our culture, lines that seem to widen with every passing event. And while some tried to turn the moment into a political weapon, others reminded us of something much simpler: the need for compassion in the face of loss. But here's the thought to leave with. Was this just another clash in the endless battle of left versus right? Or was it something bigger? A moment that revealed just how far we've drifted from being able to see each other as human beings first? That's the question I want to leave with you. Because whether you agreed with Charlie Kirk or not, the way we respond to tragedy says more about us than it does about anyone else.